And the flyer that was in the phone booth there was calling attention to the fact that some of these children who would be coming to get that kind of help were going to be African American children. And it was intended to raise up a racist anger that such a thing would be happening there. Well, I knew what to do with those flyers because I was a member, gosh darn it, of the United Mine Workers of America, which did not stand for that kind of thing, which was led in part by African American women and men and people who were children of immigrants from all over Eastern Europe and Southern Europe as well. I knew that if I took these flyers to my local union, they would do something about it because they were, gosh darn it, were the United Mine Workers of America. And the idea that an injury to one is an injury to all was real. And I also knew that the women of my local were going to be among the people most anxious to turn around this attack on their sisters and brothers in that area in the name of our union. And was I right? I definitely was. I went into the lamp house with one of the flyers, went to the locker room of the women at first, and we together went and talked to our local union president, who was standing out in the lamp house as we were getting ready for the shift change. And he immediately saw this flyer as a threat to our union. It didn't say anything about the United Mine Workers. It didn't say anything about taking on labor. But taking on the black people in our community was, in his eyes and ours, an assault on what the union stood for. And immediately he called around other officers of the local, and we as a local of the United Mine Workers took this on and helped to organize a demonstration against the Ku Klux Klan in Uniontown, Pennsylvania in 1989, soon thereafter, joining with other unions, including Rose Trump's union, the SEIU, and others who were similarly up in arms against this assault. I'm raising this because there are times when people look at the United Mine Workers and areas in which we exist and assume that our members are going to not be so great about issues of race because our members live in places where there is a lot of racism. Well, there's a lot of racism in much of the United States today. But where the United Mine Workers and our real traditions are strong, it is an easy thing to organize through the union, and a necessary thing to organize through the union, stepping up against this kind of racism. It doesn't happen 100% of the time, and as Professor Cavalier said, the women's movement hasn't always been on the right side of these kinds of things, but if there's ever been a time in history where this is absolutely essential, that we come together, as she said, the intersectionality of women's needs and labor, the intersectionality of the needs of our African American workers and humans and labor and women. And you add to that the immigrants that are still trying to live in the United States today, our current immigrants, sisters and brothers who are being trounced on as well. This is what the union movement at its best stands for. And we who are working to resurrect and help others learn from the history of our movement and our union at its best, we are doing absolutely essential, critical work now. Now, I thought I knew a lot, excuse me, about the Ku Klux Klan in Pennsylvania, mainly because they were among the forces that led to the murder of my grandmother's husband, excuse me, a Jewish immigrant in Erie, Pennsylvania in 1922, when the Klan was massively organized. I thought that I knew that how much they had done in this state and how few people, and I did not know though, what I did not know, and what I'm learning from the people who brought this event together today and who helped me begin to learn before today, how much people stood up against them We're going to be hearing about that happening right where you are in Lilly, Pennsylvania. And how many, one of my friends who was going to be with us today, a young PhD student at Carnegie Mellon University who grew up in your area, never knew that this had happened in the area in which she grew up. We have so much to teach and learn, especially now when this kind of coming together is so absolutely essential. So what my local union did in 1989 in Washington County against the Klan, it's not the first time in Pennsylvania, is it, that the union has stood up against the Ku Klux Klan and done something that we need to build on today. I am so excited to be able to just say these few words to you and to lead into the extraordinarily important history lesson that we are about to get about how people in the area in which you are sitting, and my heart is there with you, the people in that area did something well before my local union ever existed, actually, to take on the same kinds of forces. So it is my honor to be one of the women who had a chance to be, and still is, involved in this very marvelous United Mine Workers of America Union, and to be able to be part of a segue into my and your learning together things that we need to help to move forward. Our union has a proud history. Let me just parenthetically also note something that should not go without being noticed in this context. The first time that Barack Obama ran for president of the United States, there was a need to do something that the president of our union, Richard Trumka, took on in a way that was really true to the history of the United Mine Workers. Richard Trumka was somebody that the women miners worked very hard to get elected in the United Mine Workers as president, worked alongside of, and had lots of disagreements with along the way. But we were all 100% so proud when Richard Trumka went on a national speaking tour on the theme, workers need to stand up against racism and for the sake of our unions, support this African-American candidate for president of the United States. I saw him when he was about to make that speech in Pennsylvania and was one of the people who thanked him for that. And he looked at me and said, "What do you expect? This is life and death." And in that spirit, the life and death of standing up against all of the hatreds that are coming down now, the attacks on women's rights, all of the attacks on women's rights, pushing women back out of the positions of leadership and full lives that we have begun to win, and telling our daughters, not for you, you're not going there. The attacks on Black lives, trying to take away the voting rights of Black people, but in every arena of life, attacking the lives of Black people, Black families. The attacks on our immigrant sisters and brothers at the borders and those who have come into this country and their children. The attacks on teachers being able to teach the real history which we are getting a chance to reinforce that history here at this gathering. The attacks on all of us are all attacks on organized labor. And that's in that spirit, we're taking them on, aren't we? We're taking them on, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yes.
We are. And so, in the spirit of everything that's been said here today already, and the marvelous work that's been done by everyone who's been a part of today's and yesterday's gatherings, I applaud you, I thank you, and I promise you that the women miners, those of us who are still living, and there's a few of us still, are right here with you and will continue to be. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
They ended up having a rally for his presidential campaign. He had 7,500 people showed up. They had an airplane flying over Vandergrift, where the ethnics were, and over Leechburg. And on the bottom of the plane were lights shaping like a cross. So people looked up, and that reminded them, this is what can end up happening to you. The history, I said, is one thing, and I just want to get through this. And I said the biggest, and I wanted to keep understanding these people wearing the white sheets were not the only bad people. The people cheering them on, allowing it to happen. This is what we have to worry about today. We're worrying about that. I don't want to really make this into a one-way talk as much. If there's any questions or any suggestions, anything people see, especially about what's going on today, we see some similarities.
What about Lilly?
Yeah, we need people to come talk about Lilly.
Well, Lilly showed a lot of this reading. I think the reason the Johnstown people came from Johnstown first was because there were Catholics here. And they were upset at the immigrants for taking their jobs too. So Lilly showed both of these, these were Catholics and these are immigrants. And that's why they came here in the first place. And this was going on a lot of other towns around here. And there must have been a lot of other towns, people you have some experience from.
You said the preacher in the church in Vandegrift was spouting on pro-Klan sermons. What kind of church? What was the?
It was a Presbyterian church. It was really it was the biggest church in town. It was a Presbyterian church. And there were also incidents in New Jersey, the same thing. They went up and actually handed the minister money for preaching this in church. So you see what the immigrants are up against. You got teachers, families, ministers. Go ahead.
You were asking about the churches, the Claverns. Each Clavern had to turn in a monthly report about the things that they had done, how many drills they had done, how many schools they had visited, and how many churches they had visited. And it was common practice to go into the churches and to make a significant donation. And then the minister allowed them to speak. But they also it was policy that Protestant ministers had free membership in the Klan. So it was pretty widespread practice.
Yeah, that was. I read that about other places. That's what they did. But that began to show they were supported by the public. And if you'd read some of the recruiting things they put out, there was one do you know? And under these things, one of them was World War I was started by a secret pact by the Pope. And they had the people scared that they thought the Pope was going to try to take over the world. That was the thing of the Catholic Church. And, Al, this is an aside, Al Smith, Roman Catholic, finally got a nomination for presidency in 1928. I always thought that it might be a good thing that he lost. If it had won in 1928, you talk about being seated the next year in March. In October, the stock market crashes, then you have a depression. If the Pope can start World War I, he can sure as hell start a depression. So that Pope works pretty fast. He was only in 6 months and he already ruined the country. But the people believed it. I said, that's what they had in school. And when that nun did it to check in school, she thought she was trying to see how it was going to affect the leaders. How were they going to lead by reading this? But what I always thought, how would it affect just the ordinary person? Because they had nothing in school every year, at home, at church. And the natural conclusion was these Catholics and these Eastern and Southern Europeans are just no good. We got to find a way to get them out of here. Yeah.
You mentioned about the issue being beyond the white robes and the white hoods, the Ku Klux Klansmen. A Johnstown attorney friend of mine years ago had mentioned to me that that he felt that especially for black people in our community, that the issue was more detrimental to them was the issue of those in black robes that were standing up, supporting a criminal justice system where there is no liberty and justice for all. When people stand and talk about and parrot that comment and pledge allegiance to justice for all, they need to be saying justice for all who can afford it, because justice is a commodity in this country in a big way. If you have money, you can have justice, but not without that.
I'm a big fan of the Godfather movie. The book starts out with America Bonacedas sitting in courtroom number 13, waiting for justice, which he didn't get because the other people bought it off.
Yeah.
But that, yeah. Go ahead, Jim.
Well, yeah, if I can follow up on what the brother just said, if you want to hear crackpot political thought, just read the editorial and op-ed pages of the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah.
Just yeah. Okay. But having said this, I want to point out. I want to mention two points that I know of where the United Mine Workers of America did themselves proud. The first was in 1912, when there was a district convention of District 5, I believe, in which the miners local of Grove City, Pennsylvania, of all places nowadays, but not then, introduced a motion against imperialism and war. A motion which I believe passed.
Wow.
I believe passed, okay? A record that remarkable that the miners should have passed such a resolution, though they weren't the only union in the country that did so, but still. Okay. Fast forward to 1969. I was just beginning work in the history department of the University of Pittsburgh when I had the idea that it sure would be nice to have a May Day demonstration on the steps of the University of Pittsburgh Cathedral of Learning. Okay, well, I don't think there were that there ever were any May Day celebrations on the steps of the on the steps of the Cathedral of Learning, but a number of folks thought it was a good idea and should go for it. But I was new to Pitt and to Western Pennsylvania and to the politics of Pennsylvania Union, so I really didn't know who to invite to be our speaker at this rally, but having very good advice and advisors, somebody suggested that Joe Yablonsky of the mine workers be our May Day speaker. Really sounded good to me, and so we asked Joe Yablonsky if he would come, and he said yes. It was
you were here first.
Okay.
Oh.
Joe Yablonsky, just a couple of seconds more. Joe Yablonsky gave the best speech I have ever heard in my life as to why the Vietnam War, which was still raging in '69, was not in the interest of American working people and their families. And if he wasn't right about that, he wasn't right about anything. And once again, it was the speaker from the UMW who put it succinctly and put it the best. 2 weeks later, he announced to challenge Tony Boyle.
Sure. So yeah, thanks for sharing that history. It's I grew up just like Kip's colleague at CMU. I grew up in this area. I went to Penn Cambria High School, and yeah, we didn't learn about this in school. And I went to Pitt. Professor White was one of my professors, and it was not taught at Pitt. This is just history that's been lost. So I'm really glad that this is happening.
When I said about that nun, you get generations of people just growing up without knowing anything about this.
Yeah.
And not only not knowing about it, actively saying these Catholics are dangerous, these Eastern Europeans are dangerous.
So I found this book by John Craig, Ku Klux Klan in Western Pennsylvania, which I recommend. It has a lot of this specific history covered in it. I was like, wow, I never knew this happened. But, I don't know, I think nobody in this room is old enough or would have survived to have been, during this in the 1920s. But I don't know if there's anybody in here who was in this area in the 1990s. There was, an active Klan that was holding rallies in Evansburg, Somerset, Johnstown, Pittsburgh. I don't know if folks remember that. But this guy here, Nick, who I'm here with today, helped organize the Coal Country Anti-Klan Coalition to protest the Klan at Evansburg. And then, Larry was there at Somerset, and so, and Franco Harris protested the Klan in Pittsburgh.
Sleeping on the steps, yeah, but that's what you can't have 100,000 people cheering him down Pennsylvania Avenue.
Yeah.
That didn't really put any parameters on there.
I think, what Chuck said in the beginning, right, that there's still a fascist element I think we need to remember. And, just think, what can we do to continue to confront this? They're still around.
What about the killings in Lilly by the Klan? Can you speak on that a little bit?
In Lilly, where the Klan marched in, that
When did that happen? And how did that happen?
what was that, 1924, when the trainload of Klan's members from Johnstown came in. And I think it was caused by they were some immigrant steel workers, the mine workers. They would
5 of them lived in there, along the railroad tracks. And it was pretty cold. I think it was in February or March, I can't remember, but it was in 1921. And somebody put straw that they had in their mattresses too close to the fire. Well, the place started on fire. And a lot of the members got out, but they forgot their paychecks. And they went back in for their paychecks because they sent that money back home to their families. And when they did, there were as many coming out as wanted to get back in to get that paycheck. As a result, 38 of them died. They were buried here in town, and they're up in the Potter's grave up in the cemetery. Of the 38, there were 28 bodies that they could recognize, and 8 that they did not. They were just too. Everything was burnt. They couldn't get. Couldn't recognize. Couldn't identify them. They were taken by horse and carriage. There were 12 coffins. The 28 bodies were put in 12 coffins, and they were taken on, I think, 4 or 5 wagons up over Church Street and up into the cemetery. And that's a pretty good climb. And it was Father Ryan who did the services for them. Then in 1924, we had the Ku Klux Klan. And it's the most interesting thing that I think that I ever get into. And it was like I got my favorite Christmas present today. While I was here, I got to hear the recording of Mickey Quince, who lived up, and it's Mickey's voice telling his story of the Ku Klux Klan riot. And I don't know how long it is. I think you guys got to hear it more. But the family is going to give us a recording of that. And it is wonderful. It's like I just got my best Christmas present. I just can't get over the recording and the description of everything Mickey has on there. He tells you where he saw the cross burning up on the P&A Hill. He says that somebody got stuck up in Lily Mountain, people in a car, and he identifies who they are. He says that he was there when they turned the hoses on. This stuff is great, and this is history at its finest, believe me. Yeah. Well, after hearing all that, back in 1997, I was coming home from vacation, and I have an office here in town, so I'd come in on Sunday when I got home, and I thought I'd I just came down and checked my office out since I hadn't been there all week. And I came down Route 53. Now this is in July of 1997. I think it's 97. We know it's either 97, 98, or 99, and we think it's 97. There's the Ku Klux Klan. We were one of those ones. We were one of those towns that somebody over here mentioned. There was the Ku Klux Klan in their robes with a fire burning, with rifles in their hand, marching around that property. And I want to tell you something. I can see why the anger and the anxiety started that night, because it was one of the most fearful things I've ever encountered. Now, Bill Clore, who was fire chief, I talked to him the other day trying to get some dates, and he said yes, they did burn the cross there. I could see the fire when I went past. I could see the fire up in the back of the field. And they weren't in the back part of the property. They were right on Route 53 marching with their rifles marching around there. So they were making a statement of their presence, I'm sure, because of what went on in 1924. There were, now Liz lives, one of our members here, she lives close by, and she said the state police came knocking at her door telling her not to go out because of the incident. And there was never, ever, as far as I know, an article or anything written on that. Newspapers absolutely did not pick it up. They didn't sensationalize it. They didn't do anything with it, which was good because they didn't get the attention that they were seeking. That's just some of the things that we've encountered, but we have a rich history.
Promptly entered the war in April of 1917. Leading up to the November election, the suffragists of Alice Paul's National Women's Party lobbied for the federal amendment in a very aggressive and tireless way. What they did was set up pickets, the silent sentinels, as they called themselves. And they picketed Woodrow Wilson on his doorstep, on the doorstep to the White House. Day after day after day, they stood. Rain, snow, sleet, hot sun, you name it. They stood on Wilson's doorstep. And oftentimes the strategy that they employed was making Wilson eat his own words. Because of course they would take his speeches as he was attempting to make the world safe for democracy, and they would play it back to him on these banners. One banner read, "Mr. President, you say liberty is the fundamental demand of the human spirit." Another, "Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty?" And one in particular, Alice Paul's, was much more straightforward. "Kaiser Wilson, have you forgotten your sympathy with the poor Germans because they were not self-governed? 20 million American women are not self-governed. Take the beam out of your own eye." The suffragists who held these banners stood silent through it all. And then came the declaration of war from the United States. Many thought the Sentinels would stop. They certainly would not picket a wartime president. They would do what was respectful, what was ladylike, and what was right. But just like clockwork, the silent Sentinels appeared the very next day. Signature banners in hand and courage in their heart. They were ready to continue their political protest. Now, of course, picketing the president in front of the White House, they're on public property. So the challenge was, how could they remove these women from Wilson's doorstep? It's estimated that nearly 2,000 women spent time on the picket lines between 1917 and 1919. 500 of these women were arrested, and 168 of them were actually jailed. Their offense was obstructing traffic. they had the option of paying a fine or going to jail. And paying the fine, of course, would be admitting guilt. So instead of admitting guilt for something that was not wrong, they chose to go to jail. This act, too, was very well organized by members of the National Women's Party under the leadership of Alice Paul. Most of the women ended up in a workhouse in Virginia, but they wanted Paul. And so she remained in the District of Columbia, the DC jail. As a result of their protest activities, the suffragists were stripped naked, beaten, kicked, and chained to the bars in their cells. So horrific was the torture that took place in the workhouse on November 14th, 1917. It's remembered as the Night of Terror. And our friend Bill Yund from the Battle of Homestead Foundation, I did have a wonderful slide, did a fabulous piece of art depicting this. It's worth mentioning that Alice Paul was a Quaker. She practiced the principles of pacifism, social justice, and service. She and Lucy Burns had spent an extensive time in England learning strategic militant tactics from the British suffragists there. Which brings us back to Alice Paul's hunger strike and her psychiatric evaluation as a result. Even in the most weakened state, Alice Paul, through an extremely well-organized network, was able to have notes documenting her experiences smuggled out of the psychiatric ward and delivered to Doris Stevens, who was leading the National Women's Party in her absence. Paul's words were shared with members of the press, who not only published them, but soon enough, Paul and her counterparts were being referred to as political prisoners. So you can imagine there would be nothing worse in the midst of the war, World War I, while Wilson is drafting his 14 points and thinking about how to study and remove the causes of future war and make the world safe for democracy. The depiction that America has political prisoners, of course, would not fare well. This really became a tipping point, and it's one of the most important aspects of the suffragist movement, that wartime protest. We have to wonder, had it not been for the war, had it not been for this pressure, this intense pressure, would we have had the 19th Amendment? Because, at that point in time anyway, because the intense pressure was, of course, on Wilson, and he agreed to support a constitutional amendment. So the first step was the release of Alice Paul and her counterparts. They were later pardoned, and then, of course, the passage of the amendment. On January 9th, 1918, approximately 10 months before World War I ended, Woodrow Wilson endorsed the 19th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. The House of Representatives followed a couple days later. Passage in the Senate was delayed, and as a result, the members of the National Women's Party took up their banners and started all over again. Protests and pickets in front of the Capitol, the Senate building, and the White House. They expanded their horizons at that point, delivering speeches, engaging in marches and rallies all across the United States. And then finally, in August 1920, Tennessee became the last state to ratify the 19th Amendment. On August 26, 1920, it was signed into law. 3 years ago, we just celebrated, of course, the centennial. One might think that the Crusaders for suffrage took a deep sigh of relief and went on to live their lives at that point, living happily ever after.
Lilly took jobs of some Klans people, so that's what precipitated it.
I think there's a fellow back here who says he can.
One issue we need to address is there's a whole bunch of food sitting on that back table back there for y'all.
This gentleman here, his grandfather, was it?
That is my grandfather on the right over there. He was a good union man. That was my grandfather right over there on the right, on the two miners, and that was his next door neighbor. Like I say, I'm currently working on a book for the Klan ride, and it'll be coming out at the 100th anniversary there. I have personal interest because my dad was one of the Lilly persons that got 2 years in jail. He always said that he was innocent, so I decided, let me look into that. I did get the 1,600-page court trial, and I'm working on all the other information around, and it'll be a chapter on the case for and against Carl Fees. The one thing I can add what he said, not about the Klan then, 1924 was a Democratic convention, and there was a big fight who they would list as hatred organizations, and they wanted to put the Klan in there, but over the fight they weren't put in there. So the one thing, watch for the book, the one thing I can make, and the thing that we dodged the bullet, basically, on the Klan ride. The thing that I was shocked to see, when the Klan came into town, they were very law-abiding. And the people, where they were going up to the field, people were cursing and throwing stuff at them and everything. When they got up the field, the only incident that they had was when someone tried to go and stop and burn the cross. He was hit a couple times. But had the town not done anything, they would have got on the train and got away with it. So I got many more things that will be interesting. So the book goes in more detail. In closing, I'm saying basically that this is not, as a graduate of St. Francis College with degree in economics, most of the things that have been written haven't really looked at the economy of the situation, how it affected and what it did to make the environment ready and ripe for this to happen. So anyhow, watch, and it'll be something in the paper eventually when the book's ready to go, and I hope you'll be interested in getting it. So I thank Nick for coming. One other thing I want to mention, we lost two great leaders this year. My good friend and basically Don Colvon, you probably all know Don, and Ernie Acevedo. For about 4 or 5 years, I would go to the Cambridge County Fair on Labor Day, and the three of us would work the booth up there. So, unfortunately. So, in closing, union things, having stood on a picket line for 17 days myself, I remember that. But basically, the unions need to step up and protect our democracy.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a short break because, seriously, there's a lot of food that needs to be eaten back there. How about a 15-minute break to get food, come back, and we're going to discuss again in further detail about the Klan, and we want to bring the president of Lilly Historical Society up after we grab a bite to eat here to talk about her personal experiences with the Ku Klux Klan here in Lilly. So we got a 15-minute break, go to the bathroom, stretch your legs. Please get something to eat.
Round of applause.